And welcome back to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. To find out about the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network on the radio side, visit www.xzbn.net. And for the X Zone TV channel, on Simul TV, go to simultv.com, and in the search engine, type in X Zone. Tonight, this hour, I have two guests on. The first, we're going to be talking about extraterrestrials. We're going to be talking about an area that is near Area 51 that was unknown until our guest this hour, Charles Paul, started talking about this years ago. Over the years, Charles has, he has gone out there and he has told his story. But before we bring Charles on, I'd like to bring on his wife, Marie, who is going to bring us up to date over the past years that we haven't had the opportunity of talking to Charles or to Marie. And Marie, welcome back to the X Zone.
Well, thank you, Rob. And I want to tell you that we haven't been talking on any talk radio shows for several years now. We were getting an average of 3 invites a week,
wow.
And that was just impossible for Charles to even consider doing because he was still working. Well, he turned 75, and I did convince him to retire last summer. The people wanted him to stay, part-time as
Sure.
a consultant,
Mm-hmm.
and we both knew what that was going to be, and we said, no, really, it's time. So he is retired now. I'm delighted. We celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary in November.
Well, congratulations to you both.
Yeah, some of that was hard time, I don't mind telling you. But anyway, we enjoyed celebrating with most of our 6 children and most of our 13 grandchildren, which is kind of God's own miracle because we have a son living in D.C. and another son living in Washington State, and getting them all together, just doesn't happen that often. But anyway, we decided that we would love to be on your show again. Fond memories of the 2 live interviews we had with you about 15 years ago.
That's right, yeah.
And we thought it would be a good way to tell people a few things because Charles is a bit shy about tooting his own horn. He took 2 years of his spare time while he was still working to read in the Millennial Hospitality series. So it is available in audible format now through ACX, a division of Amazon. And, of course, I wanted this to happen for years because many years ago, one of the first presentations we gave, a couple came up to us afterwards. The husband was blind, and he said, you have to, put your books in a format that I can enjoy. And it's taken us a long time to get around to doing that for him. But the really exciting news, and when I looked at my emails, I realized that it's been in the works kind of for 6 years. In January of 2014, a very talented filmmaker from Stockholm, Sweden, contacted us by email, and he wanted to do something for Swedish TV, I believe. And it didn't work out. He didn't say why. Maybe it was just his schedule because his business, how he earns his living, is making videos for one entity or another.
Right.
Well, anyway, he contacted us again in 2017, and he sent us some samples of his work. He'd done a really nice portrait video of a Holocaust survivor. He'd done work for the UN. I was very impressed by what I saw. But when I presented it to Charles, he said no. And Charles is the kind of guy, he looks like a friendly, easygoing kind of guy, but he's really kind of a stubborn son of a bitch, if you don't mind my saying so. So after, just a ordinary attempt to get him to change his mind, I accepted no. Well, then a year or so later, I said, honey, I really was impressed with Emil Marzek's work. Do you think you might reconsider? And at that time he said, yeah, I guess we could think about doing that. So I sent an email to Emil, and I asked him if he was still interested. Mind you, he wasn't going to charge us to do this. This was something that he was personally interested in. He served as the video person for the Swedish Army in Afghanistan and Kosovo, and he had apparently read one of Charles' books while he was in the service. Now, this is a younger man. I mean, he falls in between my two oldest children. So, but anyway, he said yes, he definitely was still interested. And he was going to fly to Albuquerque and follow us around for, 4 days or so. And I said, I have a better idea. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, we are putting on a 4-hour event in Las Vegas next February 19. I said, it's kind of a gift to our fans because we were doing it at the Palace Station, and it was fairly expensive to do this when, we couldn't really anticipate a huge audience. We have fans all over the world, but not everybody is going to drop everything and come to Las Vegas. So anyway, he said, yeah, that sounds great. And I said, we'd be able to take you to Valley of Fire and Red Rock Canyon. By the way, did you see the trailer that I sent you in an email earlier today?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Did you like it?
Yes, it was. It was.
Say
well done.
you liked it. Okay. Well, anyway, so that's what happened. He and his first cousin flew over last February. And by the way, their mothers escaped from communist Poland, so their mothers were not originally Swedish. But anyway, it was so much fun working with them, so relaxing, probably more relaxing than if we were spending time with our actual family. And we just really had fun, and that's exactly what they did. They collected footage during that 4-hour session that we had at the Palace Station, but then, we also took them to church with us and took them out to the Valley of Fire and so forth. And, he sent us the film beforehand. He said, if there's anything you don't like, I'll take it out. This is one of the things that appealed to me especially because we had been courted by known Hollywood entity. They gave us a contract to look at, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is a shark pool that I don't ever want to try to swim in. Mm-hmm. And we'd also had a couple bad experiences. There are always people that might like to exploit you. And so anyway, this turned out so nice. And so we'll be doing the world premiere screening of the film, Walking with the Tall Whites. It's an hour and 22 minutes long, so it's a full-length movie. And that's going to happen in Laughlin, Nevada on February 15th. And after that, it will be available to subscribers of Amazon Prime.
All right, now,
And-
Marie, we've got to take our break. Thank you very much.
Already?
Already.
Oh, and I...
Yeah, anyway,
Good.
when we come back from the commercial break, Charles Hall will be joining us here on the X Zone.
That's right.
And,
he's going to be excited. Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Marie. Nice talking to you again. And X Zone Nation, once again, Charles Hall is going to be our
Hello,
guest
yeah.
this hour, and we'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton. Whoops, let's try that again. In Niagara, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. My guest this hour is Charles Hall, and I've had the pleasure of talking to Charles many times over the years, not only during the here on the X Zone, but as I've sat in for various hosts on different radio stations over my past 30 years of doing this. Charles has a very interesting story. And I'm going to tell you that I've had the pleasure of, like I said, talking to Charles over the years, and he is one of the most credible people that I've had the pleasure of talking to. So instead of me reading a bio about Charles, first of all, Charles, welcome back to the X Zone. It's been way too long, but I'm so happy you're with us tonight. And I was wondering if you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Excuse me for coughing.
Sure.
Thank you for having me on, and it's really a pleasure to be on the X Zone with you, and to be back. Where would you like me to begin?
Well, Charles, why don't we begin at the beginning? How you were in the Air Force. You were a meteorologist, I believe, and you worked in an area not very far from Area 51, Area 52.
Yes, I enlisted in the Air Force in July of 1964, and after doing 13 weeks of basic training and tech school in Illinois, I was a trained weather observer, and I was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, which is outside Las Vegas, and I arrived there in early spring of 1965. And Nellis in 1965, was the home of the Fighter Weapons School, and they had a auxiliary field at Indian Springs. Now it's called Creech Air Force Base at Indian Springs, but back then it was the Indian Springs Auxiliary Field, and it was the back door to Area 51. When you went up Indian Springs Valley, and forgive my cough, but it's just an allergy. When you go up in 1964 and 1965, and in those years, Indian Springs was the tiniest auxiliary field you can imagine. And when you went up the Indian Springs Valley, you had to go up there like 40 miles. The original dreamland was the northern half of Indian Springs Valley, and at the very northern end, there was areas 53 and 54. And 53 was when, as the weather observer, I was stationed out there for most of the 2.5 or 2+ years I spent at Nellis Air Force Base. Most of that time I spent at Indian Springs or in the other secret areas. Area 51 is just, in 1965, was just the entry, the portal area. The area numbers went from 51 all the way up to 60. And Area 51 itself was only called Groom Lake, and Area 51 itself is only 6 miles by 10 miles. And when Eisenhower had made the Open Skies Agreement with the Russians, the Open Skies Agreement gave the Russians, by treaty, the right to fly over Area 51 while coordinating with the U.S. Air Force on the Open Skies Agreement and take pictures. And so Area 51 itself did not have aliens in it. The aliens were in areas 53 and 54, and the other, and 55 and 57, all the way up to 60. The areas were arranged into lands. So Dreamland was Area 53, Area 54, and the northern half of Indian Springs Valley. Then there were other lands. There was a space land, there was gray land, which I refer to in my books as the Valleys of the Grays, and so on. And of course, before I went as a weather observer, I had to always be alone. And I was given a special clearance. I could go anywhere I wanted. Once I went up the valley in Indian Springs, I could just keep going. I could go anywhere I wanted, day or night, especially in Dreamland, and the other areas as well, but normally Dreamland. And day or night, nobody could ever stop me. Nobody could ever say no. No one could ever ask me questions. I was never briefed. I was never debriefed. But the rule was very simple. I always had to be all by myself. And I could take myself anywhere I wanted, but if I got in trouble, I had, all by myself, I had to bring myself back or die trying. No help would ever be sent. And during the 2+ years that I was there were several times that I almost died out there. And I tried to capture those memories, those memoirs, in my Millennial Hospitality series of books. I don't know how good a job I did, because when you're out in the desert by yourself, if anything goes wrong, your life is on the line. Whether it's winter or summer, the desert is a very harsh environment. And I wasn't the first one to be sent up there. According to the logbooks at the different ranges, Indian Springs had 4 different ranges and weather stations in all of them. So I was I was the only weather observer to handle all 4 weather stations, and I was in charge of all 4 weather stations on all 4 ranges. And they all had logbooks. And when I looked at the logbooks, the logbooks went back for 7 years before I got there in 1965. And during that time, I estimated that there were at least 41 weather observers who had been sent up there before me. And all of them had been compromised. About 80% or 75-80% had become, after just 2 or 3 days, had become terrified of the ranges and wouldn't go out on the ranges at all. A number of others were burnt or were attacked or were otherwise so terrified that they wouldn't go back. I was the first one that went out there and got terrified and came back in and overcame my fears and went out there again.
Well,
I was the one that stayed.
What was it that terrified you, Charles?
Well, when you go up before there was, nowadays there's Creech Air Force Base, so the ranges don't exist. But in 1964 and 65, when the Fighter Weapons School was running, when you went up the Indian Springs Valley and you got to those mountains at the very northern end, they're like 41 miles up there or so, and I was all over those mountains back in 65, 66, 67. They're in Area 53. If you look straight north from Indian Springs, the mountains straight north and to the east, that's Area 53, and that's an alien base for the Tall Whites. It was in 1964 and 1965, and the place where the Tall White Extraterrestrials, that was their hangar area, their base area, and their living area was Area 54. If you looked straight north at the same mountains and looked to the west, then Area 54, that was the housing area, and they were all tunneled in those mountains. Now, if you look at the map, if you look straight north and then you look over at the next valley, Dogbone Valley, Dogbone Lake was the landing ground for the tall white deep spacecraft. They would come in and on schedule and leave on schedule. In the base, the permanent residents, aliens, the tall whites who lived there, they had scout craft that they would use the way we use cars. But they also had a hangar where they made the so-called black cars, and those were over in Dogbone. That hangar was over in, that garage-type area was over in Dogbone Lake. When you went straight up the valley and to the northeast, to the northwest, you went up through a pass towards S4 and the turnoff to Area 52. And when you went up that valley in between the mountains of Area 53 and 54 to the north of you, and the mountains on the south side of that road, tunneled in on both sides of that road, that was their supply warehouses. That's where the American Air Force would deliver supplies to. And in 1964, 1965, I could go anywhere up in there, including Area 52 and all those places, right. But I had to be alone. And when you say what is there to be afraid of, I could do it day or night, and it took me a significant amount of time. I'm going to say several months, but when you're terrified, sometimes you're not sure. But it took me, when I first went up there, it took me a while to overcome the terror of just encountering the tall whites out in the desert. There was no briefing. There was nobody. All I was told was that the Indian Springs Valley had the legend of Range 4 Harry.
All right, stand by, Charles. We've got to take a news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation sure. Charles Hall is my special guest this hour. www.millennialhospitality.com is the website, and Charles and I will be back on the other side of this news break. Whatever you do, don't go away. You are not going to want to miss the rest of this hour. Exonation Charles Hall is my very special guest this hour. We're talking about Charles' encounters with the tall whites, who were, and I would imagine still are, extraterrestrials from another planet, another place.
That's correct. Uh-huh.
And Charles, what was it like the first time that you saw these ETs that no one had told you about?
Well, the very first time that I encountered them, until you understand what you're looking at and you know what's going on around you, there's such a tendency to question yourself, you know. So, like the first time you'd see, and if you're up close to them, you can't describe the fear, the terror. It's the fear and the terror of the unknown. And so it took me several months or several weeks or quite a while to get over the phase where when I would see them, I would think at first I thought I was dreaming. And that's why the area was called Dreamland, because right. Everyone has that. Most people have that sensation. And then you think maybe you're hallucinating, or maybe there's something wrong with you. And then when you start realizing, like you see them open a door, and you realize that you're not hallucinating, there's terror and panic that you just naturally feel, because you know they're it's the fear of the unknown. And you have to work through those, And see, one of the problems the men before me had was that they didn't have enough psychological defenses to handle it, to handle the fear. Because to get over the fear, what you have to do is you have to train your unconscious. You have to be around them enough to train your unconscious so that you have, in effect, thought through everything you're going to do based on what they might do. For example, if they start coming in and they get too close to you, you're going to feel terror. Well, what do? Do you throw rocks and start screaming, or do you just, do as I did, learn to back up? And I never did, to back up and put your back to the north wall of my generator shack and just stand there praying and saying, please stay back, I'm afraid, All those, you have to have your psychological defenses. So pretty soon there comes a time where you have thought through, where the unconscious part of your brain has got all of its ducks in a row, and you say, well, so one of the first deals I made with them, and they were very easy to deal with, was that if I were out in the sagebrush walking and I saw one of them, which was very common, then I would just stop where I was, and I would sing songs and make sounds until I was certain they knew I was there, because they're always well armed and you never want to surprise them. Part of the reason you're afraid is because if you scare them, they may fire on you. And then I would never pursue them. I would just stand there, and then I would wait for them to make the next move. And then if they wanted to talk to me, they would have to approach me. And as they came towards me, I would just stand there. We had agreed that if they got so close which certainly happened, especially in the early days, where I would feel afraid, then I would start backing away while singing my song. And they agreed that when they saw me back away, they would just stop where they were. And we would, in effect, negotiate a distance, where they felt comfortable and I felt comfortable, and then we could talk. Sometimes that distance was 1.5 miles, okay? Sometimes it was 20 feet. It just depended, you see. And then if they wanted to leave, they could just leave at any time, and I would never pursue. And conversely, they agreed that if I got afraid and that I wanted to leave, I would just back away and leave, and they wouldn't pursue me. And so that and that made it possible to progress and to get used to talking to them. Because remember, the tall whites and the grays and the Norwegians with 24 teeth, because I've personally been talking face to face with all three: the grays from Roswell, the tall whites, and the Norwegians with 24 teeth that I describe in my books. When you're talking, in order to talk to them, in order for those groups to talk to, for me and them to communicate, you have to get to where you feel there's always a certain tension, but you have to get past panic mode. Okay, you have to get to where you can just stand there and quietly be yourself, and let the blood flow around your brain. Because if you get afraid, the brain shuts down half of the brain cells, and you need them to keep yourself safe. So you have to get to where you are using all the cells in your brain to decide the answer to the simple question, what will I do next? Will I take a step backwards? Will I just stand here and wait? Will I answer? Will I not? It seems, as we sit here in our safe environments, that seems like kind of like why wouldn't everybody do that? But I speak from direct experience. When you drive the truck more than 100 miles, and you're out in Area 52 at night, and you've parked the truck and at your weather shack, and you've hiked in, 12 miles into a valley, and a dry lake bed with a dry lake bed in a mountain, and dug out caves up, or entrances, tunnels up above the old water lines, and you see that there are gray aliens in there at the entrance watching you, and it's on a night with a partial moon and kind of cold and windy, and you're just doing this because you're wondering, because you're curious, and now you're all by yourself and you're not armed, and you now realize that if they feel like killing you, they can just do so with impunity, because I was in an area where no other human had been allowed for a very, very long time. And what I was wondering was, for the Valleys of the Grays, there were 7 guys in the 7 or 8 years before me that one at a time had gone in there and had never been seen again.
Charles?
The only thing that was ever found of them was one of their trucks was found parked on a highway on the outside of Las Vegas, and I was just curious if maybe they had vanished up in that valley. And now, after walking up in there, it's now necessary to walk back. And as you're walking back, you notice, you can hear sounds that in the sagebrush behind you, on both sides of you and behind you on the trail, you're being paralleled. You know, the gray guards are kind of herding you like cattle, and the fear that you get, and I speak from direct experience, the terror that you feel, you know, you have to have total control of yourself. There's no place to run to, no place to hide. I took myself in there. It's time for me to carefully bring myself back.
Charles,
so that's where the fear comes from.
Why would the United States Air Force send you into an area like that? Were they aware that the ETs were there?
They were quite aware that they were there, and they all had their reasons. There were reasons for it. I describe a few of the reasons in the books, but see, I was never briefed. They would just say, "I'd like you to go in there and release a weather balloon and measure the winds at midnight." And, a weather observer's already trained what to do if you see an aircraft accident, what to do if, and just record it and just have fun and come out. And on paper, it would seem like it was the best job in the world. But you see, one time I asked one of the guards from one of the intelligence agencies why I'd never been briefed. And he said it's because if there were anybody giving a briefing, I would be the only one that knew enough to do the briefing. And now they had made arrangements. Now I was only an enlisted man. I'd enlisted, and in 1965, out of tech school, I only had 1 stripe, and then I remember getting my 2nd stripe. And see, the aliens had been here for a very long time. The gray aliens of Roswell, I estimated that they were here at least by the middle of the last ice age. And that's because out in those valleys, out in the desert southwest, there are places where the tunnels they created were above the highest water line from the Ice Age. In the Ice Age, those dry lake beds were full of water, and they had created tunnels that were above that water line.
All right, Charles. Charles, we're going to have to take our final break, so please stand by. When we come back, we'll finish about the tunnels, the grays, and much more. Charles Hull is my special guest, X Zone Nation. www.millennialhospitality.com. And as I was saying, when we come back from this commercial break, we'll be wrapping up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Welcome back, Exo Nation. All I can say is that I've had the opportunity to talk to Charles many times, and Charles, I don't know how you did it, my friend, but I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that you've been able to report and let the world know exactly what you saw. But there is a question I have for you, Charles.
Sure.
How come you're the only person that has ever come forward at a conference with the press, or even written a book about Area 52, 53, and the other areas and encounters with ETs?
I'm not sure, but I know that I'll finish saying one thing, and then I'll continue on in that vein that you asked. My estimate is that the gray aliens of Roswell, so all three aliens have traveling family groups. They have men, women, and children. And the aliens of and I describe them in my books, especially in book 5. Especially, I compare all three in book 5. The gray aliens, I estimate, were here by at least the middle of the last ice age, 12,000, 15,000 BC. And their planet, their home planet, I don't know exactly where it is, but I estimated, I guessed it to only be like 10, 11, 12 light years away. It's not as far away as Zeta Reticuli, because when you see their deep spacecraft, as I have, as well as their scout craft, they can't cover. It didn't appear to me that they could cover 51 light years of space in one shot. And on the other hand, the tall whites got here second. They were here they got here after the Greys did, and they got here, I estimate that they were here by 5000 BC. The third ones, and their writing looks like hieroglyphs, pink against white. If you didn't know better, you'd think that Egyptian hieroglyphs were a distillation of their bigger set of hieroglyphs. And the third one, the Norwegians with 24 teeth, they came from a very close by star, like 5.5 light years away or so. And the whites have the best technology, the Greys have intermediate technology. Both of their craft can travel faster than the speed of light. But the Norwegians with 24 teeth, they know how to reduce the forces of inertia, so they can make the crossing from, say, 5 3/4 light years in 20 Earth years. And they got here. They started arriving about the year 750 AD, and they come periodically. The Norwegians with 24 teeth I describe in my books, and they look so much like us that one could be certain. And they've been here for so long. They don't. Many of them aren't aware of their origins. They just think they're humans who got here who immigrated to Norway or to America, wherever they came from, like 500 years ago or so. So each one of the three travel in family groups, and you treat each one of them differently. Now, in terms of interacting with them, one time I asked a guy who identified himself as the highest-ranking psychiatrist in the CIA. I didn't go to him. He had just come. He had just come to stop by to make sure that I was still alive and okay. And of course, he was the equivalent of a one-star general, although he was in the medical profession. And I asked him that question, why I survived when the ones before me didn't.
Yeah.
And he said it's because of the psychological defenses. He said that the other guys sometimes would realize that they were up against, he didn't know exactly what was out there, but he said he realized what it was they were up against too soon, like after only 2 or 3 days, and that isn't nearly enough time for the human subconscious to be prepared for the shock. He said he thought the reason that I survived and was able to talk about it and made friends and made more headway than anybody was because I had so many defenses. What the generals wanted, what our generals wanted, and what the tall white generals wanted, and to a lesser extent the gray generals, but mostly the tall white generals, what they wanted was a human like me that had overcome his fears, because in the case of the tall whites, when they come here, they're more afraid of us than we are of them. And even though they live longer and have the best technology, they kind of they feel kind of the way you and I would feel if we were out in the woods and encountered Bigfoot, and it takes them a while. And so what I was the test human. See, I wasn't part of any program. I wasn't supposed to do anything. I was just supposed to go out and take the weather report and come back alive. Well, of course, then what they would do is practice overcoming their fears to come up and talk to me. Well, of course, first, I had to overcome my fear and be willing to stand there and be talked to. Well, they'd tried that with 41 men before me, and see, those men had never made it to square one. Because they had never gotten to where they could just stand there and say, "Good evening, I hope you're enjoying the evening," and just talk with them the way you and I would talk if we happened to meet each other out in the desert, out in the sagebrush on a beautiful summer starry night. Well, now that meant that I believe it's because the other men who knew they were out there, the very few the tiny handful that knew they were out there, had never quite gotten to that place where I did, and that's why the generals loved me, was because on the one hand I was expendable, but on the other hand, once the tall whites had gotten used to talking with me, remembering they're always coming in family groups and the adults are always armed, well, then that meant that those tall whites could interact with American scientists or do technology transfer, talk to generals and talk to quality folk, and they could go and talk with other generals, but first they had to come and practice talking to me to overcome their fear of being that close into humans. Now, the regular base crew, the permanent crew that manned the bases, they weren't afraid of humans. But the ones who came, the ones who arrived on the deep spacecraft, the diplomats, the scientists, and so on, that were supposed to do technology transfer with the American government in return for basing rights.
Charles,
they had to practice with me. Yeah.
Okay, Charles, we're running out of time really fast, but like I was saying, we're running out of time very fast, but like I was saying before, how come you're the only person that ever talks about Area 52, Area 53, talks about the interaction of extraterrestrials in that area when there were other people out there as well?
I don't know, but remember the history of Indian Springs. Back in the 40s, there was a guy whose nickname was Dirty Mo. The campground at Indian Springs used to be the Dirty Mo campground. And back in the year 2000, when I used the browser to go to the Indian Springs website, it was like 70-80% the history of Dirty Mo, who claimed that he was a prospector that went out there in the late 20s and 30s and early 40s and claimed that he had encountered the tall white extraterrestrials. And now when you go to that same website for Indian Springs, you can't find any reference to Dirty Mo. After I published my first 3 books, I sent a single email to the guy that was running the website for Indian Springs, and I said, I found the interest what you were publishing on Dirty Mo really interesting, and he was referencing a book. I was saying, where can I buy the book? And I sent the email one day, and the very next day, they took down the website.
Oh, my goodness.
And then later, the government wanted them to even change the name of the campground that used to be Dirty Mo's Campground. Now it's called something else, like the Western Mountain Campground or something. And I suspect that the other guys, if they did write a book or refer to that, might have been encountering the same thing. Some of the things that you would, like the Nellis incident of September 1968, that used to be on the evening news in 1968, and used to be referenced in UFO books. As the years go by, I've seen those books vanish just vanish from public view, from the library and so on. And not just the books about me, but I've seen other books like the guy who went out to Area 52 back in the early 1960s to repair a light at a facility, and I was in that facility, so I know exactly where he was and what he was doing.
Charles?
And now you can't even find that. So there's also that aspect to it.
Charles, unfortunately, we've run out of time for tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Always a great pleasure talking to you. I wish you continued success. And Exonation, if you'd like more information about our very special guest this hour, Charles Hall, visit his website, you ready?
And
here we go, millennialhospitality.com.
Yeah, and see us at Laughlin at the UFO.
All right, thanks very much, Charles. All right, we'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. Wow. Fact, fiction, you be the judge. Send me an email. Tell me what you think about the interview you just heard with Charles Hall. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. We'll be back on the other side of this news. Don't go away.